Hey everybody, how's it going? My name is Emily and welcome back to my channel where I review, critique, and summarize scary children's books. Hope you guys are having a really good week so far. Today in this video I have another episode of Analyzing Goosebumps for you, and in this video I'm going to be looking at One Day at Horrorland. This is Goosebumps number 16. It was published in 1994 by Scholastic, and of course it's written by R.L. Stine. So in this video I will be talking about the spaces and places of Horrorland, specifically Horrorland as a theme park. So how does the setting of a theme park contribute to the horror of this book, and what does it mean for kids' horror specifically? One Day at Horrorland follows the Morris family. Our main character is Lizzie, she's 12, her little brother Luke, and Luke's best friend Clay. At the beginning of the book, the whole family gets together to drive to a place called Zoo Gardens Theme Park. But they get hopelessly lost along the way until they see a sign that is pointing towards somewhere called Horrorland. And it says that Horrorland is 1 mile away. The kids decide that they really want to go to Horrorland instead of just driving around trying to find Zoo Gardens Theme Park. So they drive the 1 mile to Horrorland, and that is when things start going terribly wrong. As soon as they park in the parking lot of Horrorland and exit their car explodes suddenly into a million pieces, leaving them with no way to get home. And the workers at Horrorland, people who are dressed in these horrible monster costumes with bulging eyes, and they're called horrors, tell the Morris family that it's gonna be okay, they'll have a ride home at the end of the day, just spend the day at Horrorland, don't worry about anything, enjoy the rides, then they can go home later. So the family do kind of have to take the horrors at their word, and they enter the park and decide to just make a day of it. And at first the kids are really excited, but there's something just off about Horrorland. For instance, the park is almost completely deserted. They don't see almost any guests, and the guests that they do see are families with crying kids, which this doesn't bode well. There are also all of these signs up about how careful you need to be in the park, how dangerous it is. And inexplicably, there's quite a few signs that say no pinching, which doesn't seem to make any sense at all. The park itself is huge, and every ride in the park has to do with some element of danger or fear or horror. So the first ride that the kids go on is actually called the Doom Slide. And this is a slide ride that if you pick the wrong lane of the slide out of 10, if you pick the Doom Slide basically, the slide will just continue sliding down and down, trapping you endlessly forever. But if you pick any of the other 9 lanes, it's just a fun slide ride. Next, the kids go into the House of Mirrors, where they very quickly become disoriented and get separated, and eventually end up in their own little individual glass-walled rooms. While they're trapped there, the walls start to close in on them, suffocating them, threatening to crush them, until a trapdoor opens underneath them and they slide out to safety. Eventually, the kids determine that these rides could easily kill them, whether they are supposed to kill them or not. So after a terrifying ride on the Coffin Cruise, which is where each family member lies down in a coffin and gets sent down the river floating, the Morris family attempts to leave the park, but as they do, they realize that the front gates to the park have been locked. Lo and behold, the Horrorland horrors will not let them leave. And here we have the story's essential twist. The horrors are not people in costumes, they're actually real monsters. And everything going on in Horrorland, everything that has happened to the Morris family up until now, has actually been recorded and broadcast on live TV called the Horrorland Hidden Camera Show on the Monster Channel. But then, fortunately, Lizzie discovers that if you pinch the Horrorland horrors, they deflate like balloons. So this discovery allows the Morris family to fight back and essentially escape the park while the Horrorland horrors are chasing them. So the Morris family gets to the parking lot, steals a bus, and drives all the way home. So ends their one day at Horrorland, until they realize that a Horrorland horror has actually clung to the back of the bus and followed them all the way home. On the last page of the book, the Horrorland horror hands the Morris family 2 passes to the park for next year. So guys, as you can probably tell, the setting is kind of what's most important in this book. Rereading it again, I was immediately interested in how theme parks function in horror stories. Because I don't know about you guys, but I can think of numerous theme parks in various horror things. If it isn't theme parks, it's carnivals. And if it isn't carnivals, it's some sadistic game or trial that the protagonist has to go through. Some or all of these things show up in some kind of way in Horrorland. So in this video, I first want to say a few words about risk and chance in a horror setting, and then I want to round out the analysis by having a discussion of space and the manipulation of space in horror for kids specifically. So when I was researching for this video, I actually didn't find a lot having to do with theme parks in horror settings. So I went all the way back to basics and read an article about what theme parks are and how we interpret them by a scholar named Russell B. Nye called 8 Ways of Looking at an Amusement Park. I'll put the citation just at the bottom here. And he says something really interesting about theme parks, all theme parks, being spaces specifically engineered to provide what he calls a riskless risk. He says in the article, just quoting from him directly here, the illusory or imitative aspect of the amusement park suggests what might be called the riskless risk, a place where one may take chances that are really not chances. The park's basic appeal has long been to provide a sense of imminent danger and the likelihood of disaster without the culmination of either. So in other words, the risk associated with theme parks and the risk you feel that you're taking in theme parks is a sham. And the way that this feeling of risk is engineered has much to do with the manipulation of space and the manipulation of the feeling of safety that the space around us has. So for example, Nye talks about certain rides that are made to look dangerous, look fragile and rickety and like they could fall over at any minute to elevate the sense of danger and suspense that patrons feel when they ride certain rides. Interestingly, he also talks about how engineers are more than capable of making a silent roller coaster, but instead they choose to keep the creaks and the groans of the tracks because it makes the patrons feel like they're in danger and they're really taking a risk by going on this ride. If it were too seamless and silent, it would seem far too controlled. So these are details of the park atmosphere that make everything seem more thrilling and chilling. But at the same time, as an amusement park patron, you know that this risk, this sense of danger is calculated. Which brings the riskless risk that Russell B. Nye talks about kind of under the umbrella of play. Quoting from Nye again, the amusement park may be the only place in modern life in which all forms of play are represented in a single controlled environment. And I think the word controlled here is really important. Experiencing fear and thrill at a theme park is no fun unless you know that the activity is safe and you're gonna make it home at the end of the day. Patrons must have this baseline idea that the activities they're partaking in are controlled to make sure that they have a safe and fun experience. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to take a look at One Day at Horrorland in the context of this riskless risk and the idea of having a baseline feeling of trust that you're being kept safe in this space. So right at the beginning of the book, when they see the sign for Horrorland, Lizzie and especially her little brother Luke try to convince their parents that they should go to Horrorland instead of Zoo Gardens theme park. And on page 11, Lizzie's mom says something that betrays her anxiety about going to such a place. So on page 11, "It looks great," Luke insisted, pulling at Dad's seat back again. "It looks really excellent." "Let's go," I urged. "We're never gonna find Zoo Gardens." Mom hesitated, chewing her lower lip. "I don't know," she said fretfully. "Some of these places aren't safe." "It'll be safe," Luke declared. "It'll be very safe." It's interesting that we get an expression of anxiety like this from the adult in a Goosebumps book here. I talked a little bit about this in my reading vlog, but adults in Goosebumps books play a very particular role. Usually they are completely useless to help their children in whatever situation they've found themselves in, or they're actually complete obstacles to the protagonists saving the day. So hearing this from Lizzie's mom on page 11 gives me the idea that Stein is kind of playing with the idea of parks having a baseline sense of trust and safety. As readers, we're really not supposed to listen to Lizzie's mom. This is a Goosebumps parent, after all. Of course it's safe. Like, the kids are gonna be right in this situation. Of course it'll be safe. It's a theme park. It has to be safe. And Lizzie's mom is just being overprotective or over-worrying. So Stein references this idea that theme parks must be safe really early on in the book, But as the book goes on, he starts to subvert this idea slowly but surely. And this is where I think that a lot of the horror of this book stems from. So on page 30, Lizzie is talking to a Horrorland horror about the Doom slide, and she thinks it must be a joke that one of these lanes in the slide just slides on forever and ever and traps the person sliding. To read from the book here, "I stared at the woman in the horror costume. You're joking, right?" I stammered. "I mean, the Doom slide, that's just a joke." She stared back with her bulging yellow eyes and didn't reply. "The signs give a warning," she said. "There's always a warning." So what Stein does here is basically take the responsibility of safety off of the space and onto the individual. The horror is basically saying, if you get hurt here, if you die here, it's your fault. You took the risk and you were warned. Compounding this are all of the signs that are up around Horrorland, contextualizing the space as a dangerous space, a space where you could really get hurt. On page 18, "Welcome to Werewolf Village. Do not feed the werewolves if you can help it." Page 39, "Welcome to Doom. Population, 0 humans." Page 43, "House of Mirrors. Reflect before you enter. No one may ever see you again." So naturally, things eventually get so weird in Horrorland that Lizzie starts to feel that the lines between safety and danger are being blurred here. This baseline sense of trust is not only being subverted, it's actually evaporating. Reading from page 47, "Horrorland was too scary, I decided. It was fun to be scared, but it was too hard to tell whether the scares here were for fun or for real. Were there dangers in this place, or was it all just a big scary joke?" Starting off here at this very scary place in the book, Stein starts to take things a few steps further, and this is getting to the core of why I think an amusement park makes such a great setting for a kid's horror novel. Amusement parks mean something especially important for kids. They are spaces that are perceived as safe for kids, safe spaces of play. Kids can navigate the park safely and not have to worry about anything they might worry about on just the public street. It's a space that, in some sense, is set up for kids. And it's presided over by adults whose job it is to keep kids safe. But Lizzie and the kids in Horrorland soon realize that this basic trust in the space around them doesn't exist. And not only that, but the trust that they're supposed to have in adults doesn't exist anymore. For example, one of the scariest parts of this book, I think for me, is the part where one of the Horrorland horrors tells the kids that their parents have left and abandoned them in the park. From page 73, "You saw them?" I asked eagerly. She nodded. "Yeah, I remember them. They left. They left about a half an hour ago." "Huh?" I gaped at her in disbelief. "They asked me to give you a message," the horror said. "Message? What message?" I asked. "Goodbye," the horror said. And if you can see, that's an actual ending of a chapter. It's supposed to be a cliffhanger. It's supposed to be terrifying. And throughout the next part of the book, Lizzie maintains that her parents would never leave them, would never abandon them at this park. But there's a full chapter here where they search for a really long time and can't find their mom and dad, and Lizzie's faith in them starts to waver ever so slightly. And on top of that is the fact that the Horrorland horrors are completely unhelpful and even cruel to Lizzie and company. They do not care that these kids are lost. They do not care that these kids are scared. There are even a couple times in the book where the Horrorland horrors completely ignore these kids' pleas for help. This is a complete warping of what an amusement park is said to be and should be. And this warping of what a theme park is supposed to be is taken even further through the eyes of a kid who has not only been betrayed by the space itself, but also betrayed by the adults that are supposed to help them, who are supposed to keep them safe by virtue of the fact that they are children. This kind of story is a lot scarier from the eyes of a kid. So with all of that being said, I want to briefly talk about one other way that Stein subverts the idea of an amusement park in a really horrific way, and that is, of course, the twist. At first sight, I think the twist that Lizzie and her family are on a reality TV show kind of seems like a typical Goosebumps twist. It's a twist that isn't foreshadowed at all. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense in the context of the story, but you're supposed to kind of go along with it. But I actually think that what Stein is doing here with this twist is really smart, and I'll tell you why. So we've already established that this theme park does not behave in the way that it's supposed to, and the adults in this theme park do not behave in the way that they're supposed to. But here Stein takes the very concept of horror and turns it on its head. Thrilling activities in amusement parks are chosen activities. Patrons can choose to partake in attractions that may cause them fear. And it's a very internal sensory experience of fear that is expressed oftentimes in feelings of camaraderie with the people that go through the experience with you, so people that ride the roller coasters with you or people that go through the haunted house with you. In other words, the only reason that you kind of do things like this is a personal reason. It's for your own thrill and for your own feeling of camaraderie with your friends and family. I think that a really strong tie here exists between this and any other horror stuff that you experience for delight and shock and fun. But when it turns out that the Morris family is on television in this book, this inverts the idea in a really interesting way. They are actually experiencing fear for the gaze of someone else, and I talked a little bit about this in my vlog as well. So what Stein does very cleverly in this book is not only tell an engaging story with a really interesting setting and a lot of fun elements, but he actually manipulates the spatial rules of that setting in order to make them horrific. And he manipulates the rules and ideas of horror in a way that makes it horrific, in a way that a number of other horror stories do. It's very meta. When talking about space, I think that it's pretty interesting to think about the fact that in this book, almost all, if not all, of the trials and rides that the Morris family goes through involve the manipulation of space and personal space on an individual level. The Doom slide, sliding forever on and on and on, requires an impossible understanding of space. The House of Mirrors constricts, pushes in, suffocates space. And the Coffin Cruise does something similar to the House of Mirrors, with the coffin lids slamming closed and causing a very strong sense of claustrophobia. The other trials the Morris family go through involve darkness and unknown space, creepy space, ambiguous space. It's also really interesting to me that the Morris family arrives to Horrorland in a very close, constricted space kind of car. And this is really emphasized through Lizzie's little brother, Luke, jumping on the back of his dad's seat all the time. And the Morris family leaves Horrorland in a bus, a big vehicle that allows them all lots of space. I think this in particular connects One Day at Horrorland to a lot of other horror things. So many horror stories involve a protagonist going through a trial and leaving that trial changed and free of something that was previously constricting them, something that was suffocating them. And then, of course, the last page, the final thought, where Stein plays with the idea of horror again. So from page 123, I shrank back as the horror let go of the bus and slid to the ground. His yellow eyes studied us menacingly. He moved forward quickly. Clay and Luke hid behind Dad. Mom's mouth dropped open in fright. "What do you want?" I cried. He reached out his green hand. "Here," he said. "We forgot to give you your free passes for next year." This is such a sly nod because not only did the Morris family bring something back from Horrorland with them, sort of symbolizing the idea that you leave changed, you leave totally different from when you entered this trial. But also the horror basically tells them, yes, this was scary, yes, this was dangerous, and experiencing something like that can be a real ordeal, but don't worry, you'll be back. Bum 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 bum, goosebumps. I don't know what I'm doing. That's the end of the analysis, you guys. I have to say, and I didn't really talk about it in this video at all, but rereading this was an absolute pleasure. I recalled a lot of fears that this book gave me as an adult, not in an unpleasant way, but in a really pleasant way. This book really affected me, and it was something that I really loved as a kid. I hope you guys can relate if you read this as a kid, or if you reread it again, or just read it for the first time as an adult. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, I love doing these videos. I love thinking about Goosebumps, and I think I'm going to continue to pick them by chance because I rolled a d20 this time and really enjoyed what came out of it. And it's fun. It's kind of a challenge because I can easily pick books that I sort of have an idea of what I want to talk about, but if I pick randomly, then I have to read the book and come up with something completely new. So I find it super fun, and I hope you guys like watching these videos as much as I like making them. And if you did like the video, go ahead and give it a like and let me know in the comments below kind of any thoughts that you have. Also, feel free to tell me about your scary theme park experiences. biases because I feel like we all have them. And guys, if you're new to my channel, you can go ahead and hit subscribe as well if you'd like. I'm here doing scary kids book reviews and analyzing kids books like this for the foreseeable future. And if you want to follow me on various social media as well, the links are in the description below, as always. Cool guys, well thanks again so much for watching this video, and I will see you again next week.